I want to bring in MS Now's Michael Schnell on Capitol Hill. David Drucker is senior writer at The Dispatch, an MS Now contributor and author of the book In Trump's Shadow. Lisa Rubin is MS Now's senior legal reporter. I think it's notable, Michael, that Lutnick is the first of Trump's cabinet members questioned in the Epstein investigation. What might we know about what's happening behind closed doors?
Yeah, Chris, it's incredibly notable, and some could say it's one of the biggest, if not the biggest, day and conversation that the House Oversight Committee will be having as part of this long-running investigation into Jeffrey Epstein. So in terms of this transcribed interview, it got underway at around 11:15 a.m. this morning. They are still inside in that room just behind me. The way that this thing works is that Howard Lutnick gives an opening statement, and then Republicans are given the opportunity to question him, and then Democrats are given the opportunity, and they go back and forth from there. Of course, as you mentioned, the questions center on what the relationship was between Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein and how long it lasted. There are questions about the timeline of their ties. Howard Lutnick said that after a 2005 encounter, he had cut off ties with Jeffrey Epstein, but then he had confirmed that 2012 visit to Epstein Island. And up to 2018, there are email correspondence between folks in Lutnick's circle and folks in Jeffrey Epstein's circle. And I can tell you, this is a day that lawmakers have been looking forward to for a very long time in terms of talking to Howard Lutnick. He's appeared at least 2 times before under oath for different hearings in his capacity as Commerce Secretary, and he had told lawmakers earlier that he would be answering their questions about Jeffrey Epstein come today. Take a listen to one of those previous exchanges.
Why did you lie about your relationship with Epstein?
The House Oversight Committee and I have agreed
we are
will
the appropriate
time
reclaiming
together.
my time. I do not accept that answer. We've heard that one. We are our own committee. We have our own reason to test your credibility and veracity. Please answer the question. Why did you lie to the Post?
I have voluntarily agreed to spend the time and talk about it.
I reclaim the time. Let the record reflect you're dodging the question. The cover-up continues.
So, Chris, Howard Lutnick right there saying he would answer questions about his relationship with Jeffrey Epstein today. Again, that is happening behind closed doors right now. I'm told by a source in that room behind me that Lutnick said it was unsettling when he had received an invitation to visit Epstein Island. But, of course, he then took his family there anyway. We're sure to glean through the details of that exchange once we get our hands on the transcript. One more note that I'll say about today's transcribed interview. There are only about 6 members of Congress who are present. It's because this is happening during a week when Congress is out of session, the House not holding votes. It's worth noting that there is some frustration among Democratic members that it's happening on a recess day. However, this transcribed interview was scheduled back in March when Congress was supposed to be in session this week. Then the House schedule changed because King Charles visited last week and they had to line up the schedule with the Senate. So some members in there, but certainly not the full committee, as they get this very key witness behind them to ask him about Jeffrey Epstein.
Michael, thank you for that. David, it's against that backdrop that I think it's important to play this series of examples of how Howard Lutnick's stories have shifted dramatically in just the past 4 months. Here it is.
So I was never in the room with him socially, for business, or even philanthropy. If that guy was there, I wasn't going because he's gross.
I did have lunch with him as I was on a boat going across on a family vacation. My wife was with me, as were my 4 children and nannies.
We all forget things, David, but I guess is the key question here whether members of Congress who actually are there find it plausible he could have forgotten bringing his entire family to a private island owned by someone like Jeffrey Epstein, who he did not have good things to say about over the years.
Yeah, and the nannies, plural. So that was an interesting little side note there. Look, it's very possible for anybody to forget a whole bunch of things. I mean, I can barely remember what I did last week, let alone a decade ago, who I met with, who I didn't meet with. I forget things all the time. The problem is when you're a high-profile, either elected official or public official, and there's a major investigation like this, people are going to be very skeptical of the idea that you forgot something. That's just the price you pay for being in public service. And, you know, I think as this investigation unfolds, and presumably as Mr. Lutnick went back through his calendars and went through everything, he may now that he's being deposed by the committee have a better idea exactly where he was, when he was, and who he was with. As a matter of politics, what I have found over the years are a couple of things, Chris. One, people have a much higher bar for the other political party than they do for their own. So there are going to be a lot of voters on one side here. They're going to be really skeptical of Mr. Lutnick, and probably a lot of voters on his side that are going to give him the benefit of the doubt. The other thing here is that, look, the president's running a war in Iran, and it's still a war, no matter what he says. Inflation is up. The economy is voters perceive it to be in difficult shape, and the president's party is under the gun as we approach the midterm elections. These are the sorts of distractions that you really don't want when you're dealing with such momentous issues. And this thing just doesn't go away, and it's not going to go away anytime soon.
So, Lisa, as someone who has read many of the thousands of pages in the Epstein files and has stayed on top of this story from the very beginning, what are the key questions you would like to or would hope to see answered?
Well, look, the very most basic question that I have is the one that Madeleine Dean has, which is, why did you misrepresent to the Post the fact that you continued to have a relationship with this person? Because it's not just that 2012 island visit. There are emails between the two of them that persist through 2018. But here are my most fundamental questions. What else did you see when you either visited his home or interacted with him on the island? Who did you tell? Did you notify anyone that something seemed awry to you, or in his words, gross? And maybe most importantly of all, why did you continue to do business with him? And I think this is an overlooked part of the Howard Lutnick story. Howard Lutnick and Jeffrey Epstein were both investors in a company called Adfin. In 2018, in their last known email correspondence, Jeffrey Epstein is asking Howard Lutnick about how this shared investment of theirs is performing. Howard Lutnick, through a spokesperson at one point, said he had no idea that Jeffrey Epstein was also an investor. That email exchange, however, puts the lie to that. And so there's only so many times a person can forget, notwithstanding what David says about the fact that we are more forgiving sometimes of people who agree with us than we are of people who don't. There is a pattern here, and it doesn't just pertain to 2012. I want to know why Howard Lutnick continued, despite his statements to the Post, to have social, professional, and philanthropic ties with Jeffrey Epstein.
And maybe I've misread or misremembered, but the first encounter that they had, as I recall it, Lutnick and his wife were invited over by their next-door neighbor,
Correct.
Jeffrey Epstein, to see the place. He takes them into a room and is curious about why there is a massage room in the center of this, I think it's the largest private residence in New York, and he makes an off-color comment about the types of massages. That was their first significant encounter?
I believe that that's correct. And Howard Lutnick then goes on to tell the New York Post in that podcast interview that he and his wife together vow they are never going to be again in a room with Jeffrey Epstein. And yet, we know that while they maybe weren't in a self-contained room, they had lunch on the island outside and continued to have engagements or interactions with him, whether via email or, for example, Howard Lutnick invited Jeffrey Epstein to a 2015 fundraiser he held on behalf of then Secretary and presidential candidate Hillary Clinton. Those are the kinds of things that people are going to want to have explained. Why did you continue to reach out to this person? Why did you continue to have even a distant acquaintance-like relationship with him if you were so fundamentally, for lack of a better word, grossed out by what you saw at your next-door neighbor's home? Why didn't you completely disassociate from him? And why didn't you tell other people in your social circle that something was awry? It doesn't seem like Howard Lutnick did that, but today, of course, he'll have an opportunity to more fully explain himself.
David, if you want proof that Democrats are going to keep Epstein in the headlines, you can take a look at Sherrod Brown's very first ad in the Ohio Senate race, released just a couple of days ago. Here's part of it.
Of all 535 members of Congress, who's taken the most money from associates of Jeffrey Epstein? John Husted, that's who.
So if you're a Republican in one of these tight, and in that case, I think unexpectedly toss-up races, how do you even handle that?
Yeah, this isn't a fight you want to have. I mean, there are a couple of things here, Chris. I mean, one, this is a story that cuts across party lines, as we saw last year with both parties coming together to force the passage of the Epstein Transparency Act and to get, as much information as the DOJ will apparently release out behind the curtain. And so it's not a bad message to prosecute. I still think overall, Sherrod Brown and other Democratic challengers are going to be in better shape focusing on affordability, which is our voters' number one concern of all political stripes. But this is a good way to politically push Republicans off balance and put them in a position where they may feel compelled to answer a lot of questions they don't feel like answering. So not a bad opening gambit. As a closing message, I think all candidates will be better off taking a look at the polling in their district or state, seeing what those top priorities are, and then hammering those above anything else.
There is brand new reporting today on the country's top law enforcement agency pouring time, energy, and resources not into protecting the American people from all of the myriad threats we face here at home and abroad, but instead attacking the free press and pursuing a single journalist who dared to write a deeply unflattering piece of reporting about the director of the FBI. Two people familiar with the matter telling our colleagues Carol Leonnig and Ken Dilanian that the FBI has opened a criminal leak investigation into Atlantic magazine reporter Sarah Fitzpatrick. You may remember Fitzpatrick wrote an alarming piece of reporting. The headline was "The FBI Director is MIA." For that report, she spoke to more than 24 sources. That reporting detailed Kash Patel's emotional outbursts, his unexplained absences, and excessive drinking to the point that, quote, some of Patel's colleagues at the FBI worry that his personal behavior has become a threat to public safety. Kash Patel sued The Atlantic for publishing that story. Kash Patel claims that the story is defamatory, that it amounts to defamation. The Atlantic is standing by its reporting, even saying that it has received more corroboration about its reporting since the story published. Now the FBI has launched a, quote, so-called insider threat investigation, which is, according to Carol Leonnig and Ken Dilanian, highly unusual because it did not stem from a disclosure of classified information and because it is focused on leaks to a reporter. With this investigation, agents can now try to gain access to Sarah Fitzpatrick's phone and phone records. They can go through her contacts on social media, and they can run her name through various FBI databases. It is something that is making some staffers at the FBI deeply uncomfortable. One source telling MS Now, quote, they know they are not supposed to do this, but if they don't go forward, they could lose their jobs. You're damned if you do and damned if you don't. This news today, though, tells us, well, a whole lot about the state of the FBI under Kash Patel and what his priorities are. But it also leads to real legal questions about the lawsuit Kash Patel is bringing against The Atlantic. Because, you see, if The Atlantic's reporting is actually defamation, as Patel claims and seems prepared to argue in court, that would mean that Patel has the goods. He can prove it is all false and that it was printed with malice. But if that's true, then it cannot also be true that a criminal leak investigation is necessary, the kind normally reserved for the disclosure of classified state secrets, of real information. Those two are in legal contradiction. In a statement, an FBI spokesperson denies that the investigation exists at all. The Atlantic said this in a statement, quote, an FBI criminal leak investigation targeting our reporter would represent an outrageous attack on the free press and the First Amendment itself. We will defend The Atlantic and its staff vigorously. We will not be intimidated by illegitimate investigations or other acts of politically motivated retaliation. We will continue to cover the FBI professionally, fairly, and thoroughly, and we will continue to practice journalism in the public interest. That is where we start today with the journalist who broke this story, senior investigative reporter Carol Leonnig. Also joining us, former assistant special agent in charge at the FBI, national security intelligence analyst for us, Michael Feinberg. Carol Leonnig, take me through what you and Ken are reporting today.
Yeah, so with my great colleague Ken Dilanian, we broke a story that honestly made us both really worried for a free press, reporters in the normal, everyday course of news gathering, because we write about this too, and we've written quite a bit about the FBI and about Kash Patel before this Atlantic story ran. What we learned was that the FBI agents in a unit in Huntsville, Alabama, where Director Patel basically transferred tons and tons of agents, hundreds, I think in excess of 500 FBI personnel were transferred to Huntsville. That unit began getting instructions and orders from the executive suite of Patel that they were to investigate and review Sarah Fitzpatrick's interactions with social media, with contacts, with links. We don't know the status right now, Nicole, of whether or not they have compelled any internet or phone providers to turn over records, metadata and other things about her contacts with sources. But we are told that investigation's ongoing, and the agents involved have raised concern internally, obviously not to the director directly, but have raised concerns that this is not how FBI investigations go. They are typically predicated on a likely crime. They exhaust every means possible in investigations to determine whether a criminal leak has occurred, and they also go to a reporter's information when they are very sure a crime has occurred and they need the information and have exhausted all other means. And this is not what's happening today.
First of all, why did he transfer 500 agents to Huntsville, Alabama?
You know, Patel has a vision or a version of the FBI in his mind in which they are cops. And he believes that having a lot of FBI personnel in Washington is a waste of resources, and sending specialized teams out to field offices, which is what he did, and to Huntsville means fewer people in the so-called bureaucracy. I'm not so sure it accomplishes what he's saying about putting more cops on the street, which, by the way, is not what FBI agents are. But it certainly removes more people from Washington and creates the optic that you have a smaller, slimmed-down headquarters and more people, quote unquote, in the field.
What crime would the agents in Huntsville, Alabama, take a single step that violates her freedoms, that violates her privacy, to even pretend to investigate? The crime of making Kash Patel look like an alcoholic or a bad employee? I mean, like, what crime even gets this out the door?
So I want to be careful about this, Nicole, and I know you know what I'm going to say next. This is ongoing reporting. However, what I can say to you is it is unheard of for any of these steps to be taken when there is not evidence of a disclosure of classified information. However, when Pam Bondi was the Attorney General, she rescinded an important media policy that had been codified and made much more specific by former Attorney General Merrick Garland. And when she repealed that policy about when you can compel, say, a Verizon or, AT&T to turn over phone metadata, she repealed those provisions that required the Attorney General, the Deputy Attorney General's permission and authority to do that. And in her repeal, she also said that they could have leak investigations for classified information leaks, but also sensitive information leaks. Now, it's not a crime to discuss law enforcement sensitive material. And it's just curious about Bondi's policy that it changed the language ever so slightly. I can see a world in which Kash Patel believes, or his lawyers or his counselors believe, that they can argue that his movements across the country or what his security detail communicate internally is law enforcement sensitive or sensitive about his whereabouts and his safety and his security. We don't know that's what's going on, but I am really pinpointing as an analyst of this event how Bondi's language about when they can begin leak investigations is different from Attorney General Merrick Garland's provisions.
I mean, Michael Feinberg, I always listen very carefully to what Carol Lennox says and doesn't say. And on the doesn't say part, I mean, they have a tool to use their extraordinary powers at the Department of Justice and the FBI to hack into basically, read all of her emails and text messages and encrypted messages in pursuit of a unflattering article about Kash Patel. I mean, that is the worst example, one of the worst examples of people acting in a way that presupposes this moment won't end. It is also part of a pattern. The New York Times reported last week the FBI said to have investigated Times reporter after article on Kash Patel's girlfriend. Tell me what you make of this.
Yeah, I mean, well, first I want to clarify, they can't actually get the content of any of her messages or phone calls or emails without getting an Article 3 independent judge to sign off on it. That's sort of the one bulwark we have left to stop them from totally overreaching. But what we're seeing here is a sea change in terms of how the FBI views its relationship with the American public, the American media, and quite frankly, its place within the social contract. I'm aware of many stories that came out about politicians, not the FBI director, but about public figures during my tenure with the Bureau, where the people who thought they'd been mistreated demanded that an investigation be opened. And every single time, the organization refused. Because if the FBI starts doing something, anything really, that is not based on an actual threat to national security or a violation of criminal law, then it in and of itself has become lawless. It's become a secret police force. I don't think we're there yet. The fact that the agents working on this apparently went to Carol and her colleagues actually gives me hope. But the fact that Kash Patel might have ordered these people to do it in the first place is just exhibit 12,647 that he never should have been picked for this job in the first place. Not just because he lacks the credentials and the experience, but because he lacks the temperament, the judgment, and the integrity.
Another bombshell report from The Atlantic about Donald Trump's embattled FBI director. Today, the magazine published this photo of, quote, Kash Patel bourbon. The bottle, which The Atlantic purchased on eBay, also features a rendering of an FBI shield. The report says, quote, Patel has given out bottles of his personalized whiskey to FBI staff, as well as civilians he encounters in his duties. That is according to 8 people, including current and former FBI and Department of Justice employees and others who are familiar with the matter. In a statement to the magazine, an FBI spokesperson did not deny Patel hands out whiskey bottles with his name on it, called this a form of gift giving that falls in line with the Bureau's, quote, ethics rules. The whiskey scoop comes from Atlantic journalist Sarah Fitzpatrick. It is a follow-up to her reporting from last month, diving into Patel's controversial tenure as FBI director. The report comes on the same day. 2 sources tell MS Now the FBI launched a criminal leak investigation into Fitzpatrick's reporting on Patel. Publicly, an FBI spokesperson denied such an investigation. Also today, the FBI raided the office of Virginia State Senator Louise Lucas this morning. She recently led Virginia's redistricting effort to counter Trump's push to rig the midterms. Details about that raid remain murky. We do know an investigation started under the Biden Justice Department, but over the course of the last 3 years, no charges have been filed. MS Now also learned Trump lackey Lindsay Halligan had been pushing to bring charges in the case. That was before a judge removed Halligan as an interim U.S. attorney, ruling her appointment was unlawful.
So all of the stories are connected here. I will note that Kash Patel, on April 10th, Sarah Fitzpatrick, she wrote a story on April 17th that starts with, on April 10th, Kash Patel could not log into his FBI account, essentially. He couldn't get into the system, and instead of thinking he just had the wrong password, he thought he was fired and started calling his allies, and people in the FBI then started calling the White House and Congress asking, who is the FBI director, if not Kash Patel? So I don't know if this is boding well for his prospects, but Michael, Alicia, they have been attacking our democracy from the beginning. They are actively trying to dismantle it. By they, I mean the White House, the current Republican Party apparatus, and they are doing it in various ways. They're attacking the journalists and journalism. They are attacking their quote-unquote opponents, other duly elected Democratic leaders. They are trafficking and sowing misinformation and disinformation. They don't want to answer any questions. We're going to slippery slide, dive into some crazy stuff.
I hear you, Simone, but we got bourbon, so we're good. That's the level that we're at, folks. I mean, Simone has laid out the indictment against not only this FBI director and the agency itself, but this administration. And yet it boils down to actions like this, where you just get your own little personal bottle of bourbon. I mean, Alicia, what does that say about where we are here?
It says we are deep into dysfunction, but that also we've known that this was all coming, right? Mm-hmm. They've actually told us that their plan was to go after all of the institutions that uphold our democracy. There was an actual playbook, and now we are watching them run the play. So, Simone, to your point, devastating, upsetting, but not surprising.
I went back, Simone, and I was trying to find in Project 2025 the section that said we need to get a personal bottle.
Now, that I do believe was improvised, which, kudos, I guess, to Kash Patel for trying to put his own spin on it. But, again, I think it does always goes back to Project 2025. To Alicia's point, they telegraphed to us. Yeah. We had, again, Kevin Roberts, he's not about Trump. This is about imbuing Trumpism.
Of journalists in leak investigations. There might be investigation of the leaker, but not the journalist. In fact, the Biden administration tried to, in part, codify this with internal regulations. Those got walked back by this administration. And so, what I'm concerned about here is really twofold. One is that potentially the administration could call Sarah Fitzpatrick to testify, issue a subpoena for that, and then she would have to either give up her sources or potentially face, some sort of judicial consequence. The other is that the administration starts seeking digital data from her or other people at the Atlantic, a search warrant for their email accounts, bank accounts, and so forth as part of this investigation. I will just say one thing. This administration has absolutely collapsed the credibility of the Department of Justice, the FBI in general. I think it's going to be really incumbent on magistrate judges in investigations like these to try to look past just the initial things that the department is saying in seeking these search warrants to try to understand, is this for a proper or improper purpose?
Good evening from New York. I'm Chris Hayes. Kash Patel is the most incompetent FBI director in the country's history. I don't think it's really even close. He is also willing to go whatever lengths he can to exact retribution from anyone that he feels has personally wronged him. No qualms about abusing their position and bringing the full power of the state down on their perceived enemies. In fact, that's why Donald Trump got into the game to begin with. And he seems to have a partner in Kash Patel, because we are learning much more about how dangerous the administration's revenge campaign can get. The first development revolves around this bombshell report on Patel's tenure last month by Sarah Fitzpatrick of The Atlantic. More than 24 sources in and out of the FBI told Fitzpatrick Patel frequently disappeared from the job and drank to excess, that he was erratic, suspicious of others, and prone to jumping conclusions before he has necessary evidence. On multiple occasions in the past year, she wrote, members of a security detail had difficulty waking Patel because he was seemingly intoxicated. And, notably, a request for breaching equipment, normally used by SWAT and hostage rescue teams to quickly gain entry into buildings, was made last year because Patel had been unreachable behind locked doors, according to multiple people familiar with the request. Now, you might remember Patel issued a blanket denial. The Atlantic included that denial in their piece. Fitzpatrick in the magazine said, we stand by our story, even said they had gotten corroboration from more sources after the story was published. Then Patel sued the magazine and the reporter for defamation for $250 million. A seemingly rushed, error-ridden lawsuit had a bunch of typos, misspellings in it that was ridiculed as an obvious ploy by most legal experts who read it. Today, things appear to have escalated because it's no longer the domain of a private lawsuit, but rather the government that represents all of us. According to exclusive reporting by MS Now reporters Carol Leonnig and Ken Delanian, Patel's FBI, which is to say our FBI, the American FBI, has now launched a criminal leak investigation into Sarah Fitzpatrick, the author of that Atlantic story, an investigation sources call, quote, highly unusual. It could now be used as an excuse to obtain Fitzpatrick's phone records, run her name and information through FBI databases, examine her social media contacts. With reporter Carol Leonnig about all of that in just a second. There's only one way to interpret it. It is an attempt to chill critical reporting. It is, obviously, a flagrant attack on the First Amendment. It is not the first time Kash Patel's FBI appears to have done this. Last month, you might remember, the New York Times reported the FBI had launched a criminal stalking probe into one of the Times reporters for writing a story on Patel's girlfriend. Here is how Patel responded when asked about those allegations.
This same reporter delivered a baseless story which caused a direct threat of life to my girlfriend. We are going to protect not only me and my loved ones, but every American that is threatened. But here's the thing. Me and mine are like you and President Trump. We're as tough as they come. We're not going to stand down. We're not going to take it a knee on this one or anything.
Now, that probe went nowhere. The Times correctly called it what it was, the Trump administration examining whether to criminalize routine news gathering practices that are widely considered protected by the First Amendment. Apparently all because of Kash Patel's personal animus against reporters. But threatening reporters wasn't the only thing the FBI was up to today.
Federal agents are arresting people in that string of FBI raids across Virginia. This is all connected to an influential Democrat in the Commonwealth of Virginia, State Senator Louise Lucas. They are at her office executing warrants as a part of a major corruption probe.
Now, you see that picture there? The FBI agents in camouflage with long guns. Do you think that's necessary for this raid of the office? Here are those FBI agents this morning raiding the office of Louise Lucas. Look at them. 82-year-old state representative. You think you got to do that for that? Or do you think that's done for the cameras? Lucas, the second woman of color to serve in Virginia State Senate after growing up under Jim Crow. The move comes, as you might know, just 2 weeks after it was Lucas who almost more than anyone else led the successful push to redraw Virginia's congressional districts to favor Democrats to respond to the actions of Donald Trump and Republican state legislators to tip the playing field and in clear defiance of Donald Trump.
They started, we'll finish it. We would not be in this place if it had not been for Donald Trump and his shenanigans and trying to get what he called 5 new seats that he was entitled to. He ain't entitled. I'm sorry. He's entitled to anything.
In a statement responding to the raid, Lucas said, quote, "I've never been afraid to stand up to Donald Trump or anyone else that has tried to undermine our democracy," adding, "I am not backing down." The FBI says the raid is part of a years-long corruption investigation into Lucas and a bunch of local cannabis dispensaries in Virginia. And that may very well be the case, maybe. Do you trust them? Can anyone look at this FBI and this Justice Department right now in this moment and simply assume they are acting in good faith? Assume it's a coincidence these raids came shortly after the Virginia referendum Lucas led. Also just a week after Patel giddily announced a new criminal indictment of longtime Trump critic and former FBI Director James Comey. Should we also wonder who tipped off a Fox News correspondent to the Lucas raid? After Fox was the only station on the scene in Southeast Virginia when the raid appeared to start. Now, again, whatever the facts turn out to be in this case, and again, I'm withholding judgment as to what the actual merit is. It is, of course, conceivable there's some wrongdoing here that was investigated. The thing about where we are right now, and I can't stress this enough, is that Trump and Blanche and Patel, the entire administration from the White House out down, have forfeited any presumption of regular order or good faith. In fact, they have created a presumption contrary to that. You must assume, as a rebuttable presumption, that what they're doing is retaliation, that the cases they're bringing aren't warranted. because they want the most powerful law enforcement agency in the U.S. government to work for them personally and no one else. And they've been very clear about that.
Even though Sarah Fitzpatrick is already being sued by Kash Patel, and even though she may be being criminally investigated by Kash Patel's FBI, tonight, The Atlantic Sarah Fitzpatrick published yet another incredible story about, ding, 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 you guessed it, Kash Patel. Now, in this one, 8 people familiar with the matter, including yet again current and former FBI officials, told Fitzpatrick that it is not unusual for Patel to travel with a supply of personalized branded bourbon. Who among us? Now, the 750 milliliter bottle that he travels with is engraved with Kash Patel's name and title, FBI Director. Classy. As well as the symbol of the FBI shield. Now, if you look just below the shield on the screen, you will see Kash Patel's name yet again, but this time spelled his preferred way, of course, with a $sign instead of an S. Again, stay classy, Kash Patel. Stay classy. Patel also appears to have signed some bottles, writing his signature and then the number 9, presumably because he's the 9th person to hold the title of the director of the FBI, which leads me to believe he has spent an awful lot of time on this particular merch project, right? Now, Fitzpatrick also writes that Patel has distributed these self-branded bottles to staff and civilians while on official business, including during at least one FBI event, and that Patel has even used Justice Department aircraft to transport cases of his bourbon merch. Now, when The Atlantic reached out for comment, the FBI didn't even dispute that Patel has been giving out these branded booze bottles. Instead, a spokesperson said that Patel has followed all applicable ethical guidelines and pays for any personal gifts himself, and portrayed the gifting of booze, bourbon, personalized bourbon, as routine, saying that the bottles in question are part of a tradition in the FBI that started well over a decade ago. Is it now? And guess what? When Fitzpatrick tried to fact-check that statement, it fell completely apart. The FBI declined to provide images of bottles bearing the names of any past directors, maybe because they don't exist. And when Fitzpatrick asked a former senior FBI official if he had ever seen any personally branded liquor bottles distributed by any previous FBI directors, he burst out laughing. Now, the story here is, it's not just that Kash Patel allegedly drinks a lot. By this point, we've all seen him drinking with our own eyes. We all remember that visual. The story is that Kash Patel allegedly drinks a ton at work as the boss in a workplace that traditionally has had a zero-tolerance approach to drinking on the job and even the abuse of alcohol off duty, because it is our chief law enforcement agency. As one former FBI agent told Fitzpatrick, the bottles are demoralizing, as they suggest one set of standards for the FBI's director and another for the rest of the bureau. Now, the lawyer for another former agent, former assistant director in charge of the FBI's Washington field office, Stephen Jensen, told Fitzpatrick, quote, there are line agents out there spending their nights and weekends trying to finish warrants, write reports, plan arrests. Yet the FBI director apparently has the time to design logos, go to hockey games, sit for multi-hour podcast interviews. This is one of the most serious jobs in the country, not a vehicle for self-promotion and branding. That's very well stated. Now, when Fitzpatrick published her first big scoop about Kash Patel last month, part of what was so amazing about it was that she had more than 24 sources. I spoke to her that very night that the piece came out, and she told me that even more people from inside the bureau were already trying to talk to her, trying to tell her about Kash Patel. And they weren't doing that lightly.
These are not the types of people who are willing to speak out outside of the FBI, especially right now, because Kash Patel is going after people with polygraphs in a way that has never happened at the Bureau. So for it to be this level of alarm, this is people genuinely concerned that America is a danger as a result of this conduct. And I feel, a real responsibility to take care of that reporting incredibly carefully.
Sarah Fitzpatrick said that those people spoke to her last month because they worried about the safety of our country, with this guy in charge of keeping us safe. That guy right there. There you go, with Kristi Noem. And now, even with a potential criminal investigation into leakers and a massive defamation lawsuit, more people have come forward to say that they do not think Kash Patel's behavior is fit for his office. Now, I want you to just keep that story in your head. I want you to just think about how hard the FBI is working to try to catch leakers who say bad things about Kash Patel's personal behavior. And I want you to compare that to this.
Breaking news now. A very influential Democrat from Virginia, State Senator Luis Lucas, is at the center of a major FBI corruption investigation. Right now, in fact, agents are executing search warrants across the Commonwealth, including her office. Alex Hogan is in Portsmouth, Virginia. Alex.
Now, this morning, when the FBI raided the office of a prominent Democratic state official in Virginia, Fox News was on the scene. They had camera crews on location, ready to film as SWAT teams and FBI vans raided Virginia State Senator Luis Lucas's office and nearby businesses. And that is pretty impressive, considering that Portsmouth, Virginia, you can see it on the map there, is about a 3-hour drive from Fox's office in D.C. It is 200 miles away. Now, maybe Fox just got lucky. Maybe they just had a reporter around the corner just kind of hanging out in Portsmouth and a whole camera crew when the raid started. But it strikes me as a lot more plausible that someone in the FBI leaked the timing of the raid to them. Now, while Luis Lucas is a huge deal in Virginia politics, she's the Speaker of the state Senate. She's primarily known on the national stage for just one thing. Earlier this year, she led the effort to redraw the state's congressional maps, which could help Democrats win another 4 seats in the midterms and counterbalance the gerrymandering Republicans have done in other states. And the raid was reportedly part of an investigation that opened under the Biden administration that examined potential corruption and bribery. But beyond that, the Department of Justice has not released any information. Now, we don't have, as I've said, any real details on the reasoning for the raid or what exactly they're accusing Lucas of doing. So is it plausible there was actual wrongdoing by Lucas? Sure, it's plausible. But the context is everything here. Because a source familiar with the matter tells MS Now's Carol Leonnig that Trump's former U.S. attorney for the Eastern District of Virginia, the district where this investigation is likely based, believed bringing a case against Luis Lucas would be good for the White House. That bringing a bribery case against a prominent Democrat before the midterms would be good for the White House. Even though other prosecutors at the office were not sure about the strength of the case. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? As Virginia's Attorney General Jay Jones put it today, we simply do not have sufficient information about the reported FBI activity in Portsmouth. However, several previous actions of the U.S. Attorney's Office for the Eastern District of Virginia have undermined public confidence in that office. I urge everyone to exercise restraint and judgment until the relevant facts are known in this matter. Now, there's a lot of stories going on. I just want you to keep that story in your head. I want you to think about how the FBI raided the office of a prominent Democratic lawmaker right after she did something Trump did not like, and how Fox News just happened to be there to film it. I want you to think about that and compare it to this. Because yesterday, we learned that the Justice Department has agreed to, quote, return or destroy evidence seized from MAGA Republican Congressman Andy Ogles. And if the name Andy Ogles isn't ringing any bells, it's probably because former Congressman George Santos, you remember that guy, sort of stole his thunder for a while. Because for a while, the two seemed to be competing for the title of the most prolific liar in Congress. I mean, according to local Tennessee news reports, Ogles claimed to be an economist, but it turned out he had only ever actually taken one single community college economics course, and he barely passed it. He claimed to have served for years on the board of directors of a city that it turns out does not have a board of directors at all. I could go on, but you get the point here, right? Back in 2024, the FBI seized Andy Ogles' phone as part of an investigation. You see, among the things Andy Ogles appears to have lied about were campaign contributions, a serious thing to lie about. He claimed that he had donated $320,000 to his own campaign back in 2022. But it turned out that the congressman appeared to be broke. In his financial disclosures, he did not appear to even have a checking or a savings account of any kind. Now, Ogles later admitted that he had not, in fact, donated $320,000 to his own campaign, but he never really explained why he apparently lied about all of it. And campaign contributions are serious business. There are a lot of laws involved. So the FBI seized Ogles' phone. That was at the end of 2024. But guess what? When Trump took office last year, suddenly, just 11 days into Trump's new term, the career prosecutors handling the case withdrew from it. The case was handed up to be run completely out of Main Justice in Washington, D.C. Now, at the same time, Ogles was in the running. He put himself in the running for, I should say, a new highly competitive title, biggest suck up to Donald Trump. And he did a lot to try to get there. He introduced a bill to give Trump the power to buy Greenland. He nominated Trump for the Nobel Peace Prize. And maybe most amazingly, Ogles proposed a constitutional amendment to allow Trump to serve a third term. He even specifically worded that amendment so it would only allow third terms from presidents who hadn't served 2 consecutive terms, meaning it would let Trump serve a third term, but not Obama. There you go. And now, after all that sucking up, the investigation into Ogles lying about a massive campaign contribution seems to be just quietly going away. In a vacuum, each of these stories individually are reason for concern about what is happening at the Justice Department right now. But taken together, they are a blaring alarm. And when you put them in the context of the past year, it's all the worse. The Justice Department has investigated or charged so many perceived Trump enemies, it is genuinely getting hard to track, and we may miss people in this list. Former FBI Director James Comey, former CIA Director John Brennan, New York Attorney General Letitia James, Senator Mark Kelly, Senator Alyssa Slotkin, Congresswoman Maggie Goodlander, Congressman Jason Crow, Congresswoman Christy Houlihan, Congressman Chris DeLuzio, former National Security Advisor John Bolton, Federal Reserve Chair Jerome Powell, Federal Reserve Governor Lisa Cook, Senator Adam Schiff, former New Jersey Governor Chris Christie, Minnesota Governor Tim Walz, Minneapolis Mayor Jacob Frey, St. Paul Mayor Kelly Herr, Minnesota Attorney General Keith Ellison, Hennepin County Attorney Mary Moriarty. The list is just unfathomable at this point. But the pattern is clear. Trump is using the Justice Department to help his friends and go after his enemies. Last night, former President Barack Obama issued a stark warning on exactly this issue during the interview with Stephen Colbert.
We can survive a lot. Bad policy, funky elections. There's a bunch of stuff that, we can overcome. We can't overcome the politicization of the criminal justice system, the awesome power of the state. You can't have a situation in which whoever's in charge of the government starts using that to go after their political enemies or reward their friends.